Hello, and welcome to the Dumb Defenses podcast, where we go around the world and through time to bring you the weirdest legal theories. I'm Frankie.
I'm Judah, and welcome to a fresh nightmare.
And I don't know, y'all could hear the daggers that Judah was shooting at me during our teaser last week, but we had discussed what we were going to do this week, and then I saw a shiny and completely forgot what we had discussed. So we'll bring you that hearsay case at some point in the future. I am doing a different case today.
Okay. Yip-up-ba-da-ba-ba.
So I guess I'm going first.
Yeah, well, so I'm doing McCarthyism-ish, and you are doing what?
I'm doing obscenity.
Obscenity. If you're going to reference what I think you're going to reference, it's one of my favorite quotes in, jurisprudence.
Yep. Shall we dive in?
Let's dive in.
All right, I will be telling the tale of Mr. Nico Jacobellis versus Ohio. My sources are the original source material, which is 378 U.S. 184, a SCOTUS case from 1964, and clevelandhistorical.org, which had information about the Heights Art Theater, written up by Michael Rotman. So, the theater, which was originally called the Heights Theater, was the theater at issue in this case. It's a movie theater on Euclid Heights Avenue in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. In 1922, the movie theater there got raided when it showed a movie on a Sunday. 500 patrons were cleared out from the theater, and 2 managers and a projectionist were arrested for violating Ohio's blue law, which prohibited any kind of entertainment on the Sabbath. So this theater has a long history of run-ins with the law. The blue law at that point was repealed in 1931, which was the same day that 9,000 Cleveland Heights residents succeeded in petitioning to have the city ordinance changed to allow Sunday viewings. That was some background on this theater and how this theater is not afraid of doing things that may or may not be against the law. In 1954, the theater was renamed to the Heights Art Theater, in which they changed their focus to, quote, only distinguished motion pictures of international prestige. One movie they showed, which was lauded as the theater's peak from a publicity perspective, was a French firm called Les Amants, or The Lovers, came highly acclaimed from Europe. It was about a married woman's love triangle, which was a very risque topic for 1954. The married woman had become bored with her married life and abandons her husband and children for a young archaeologist that she has fallen in love with. The movie also contained a 2-second shot of a breast in the midst of an explicit love scene. This would be the objectionable scene in the movie. So, there was a review in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which was a local weekly newspaper. They called the movie shockingly nasty.
Ooh, shocking.
The city's law director and the Cayuga County prosecutor both watched the movie, and then after they watched it, they discussed it with the chief of police, Edward Gaffney. Believing the film violated Ohio's obscenity laws, Chief Gaffney went to the Heights Art Theater on November 13th, 1959, during a showing of the movie and ordered the theater cleared, the film confiscated, and Nico Jacobellis, the theater's manager, arrested. I love how instead of just going in on off hours and arresting him, he goes in and watches the movie first.
You gotta see that boob. Gotta
right?
see the boob.
The 2 seconds of boob.
I need to see the boob for myself.
Probable cause. Gotta find that probable cause. Mr. Jacobellis was an Italian immigrant who studied and taught film at Western Reserve University, which people may now know as Case Western Reserve University in Hudson, Ohio. His defense largely relied on following the theater owner's directives, as owners had screened the film in other cities without issues. The act was just following orders. Defense is not the best defense.
No.
In general, we may talk about cases in which that did not work out for people, but that's what we're dealing with here. Mr. Jacobellis was charged with 2 counts of possessing and exhibiting an obscene film from the Ohio Revised Code, section 2905.34. I'm going to read this section of the code. It is long and repetitive, but also kind of funny.
Okay.
No person shall knowingly sell, lend, give away, exhibit, or offer to sell, lend, give away, or exhibit, or publish, or offer to publish, or have in his possession or under his control an obscene, lewd, lascivious book, magazine, pamphlet, paper, writing, advertisement, circular, print, picture, photograph, motion picture, film, or book, pamphlet, paper, magazine, not wholly obscene, but containing lewd or lascivious articles, advertisements, photos, or drawing, representation, figure, image, cast, instrument, or article of an indecent or immoral nature, or a drug, medicine, article, or thing intended for the prevention of conception or for causing an abortion, or advertise any of them for sale, or write, print, or cause to be written or printed a card, book, pamphlet, advertisement, or notice, giving information when, where, how, of whom, or by what means of any such articles or things can be purchased or obtained, or manufacture, draw, print, or make such articles or things to sell, give away, or show to a minor a booklet, pamphlet, magazine, newspaper, story paper, or other paper devoted to the publication or principally made up of criminal news, police reports, or accounts of criminal deeds, or pictures and stories of immoral deeds or lust or crime, or exhibit upon the street or highway or in a place which may be within the view of a minor any such books, papers, magazines, or pictures. Whoever violates this section shall be fined not less than $200 nor more than $2,000, or imprisoned not less than 1 nor more than 7 years, or both.
So it's a felony because it's punishable by more than a year in prison.
Correct.
It is also weaving in a lot of anti-abortion, but the thing about you can't have crime reports.
Yeah, it was weird. It's definitely like the people in the legislature were sitting there going, how many ways, how clear can we be about this? And in doing so, they've created a law which probably has more loopholes than they meant.
Yeah, because right in there, I could have a dirty audio recording. That's not included in there. I could have as many dirty audio books in the state of Ohio as I want.
And you can sell them because that's not, it's only talking about print or movie. It doesn't say anything about audio recordings.
What about a live nudie cutie? It's not in there.
It doesn't talk about that either. Doesn't talk about prostitution or anything like that. It just is focused on written materials and movies.
Okay, so we have this wide law that encompasses abortion materials, advertising for abortion materials,
and dirty movies.
Dirty movies, and reports of criminal activity or reports of lewd or lascivious conduct.
Yeah. That one was just kind of thrown in there for fun, I guess. Let's just toss that in there.
Okay.
So he was charged with 2 counts under this statute. He waived jury, and the trial was heard by a panel of 3 judges. It was a lengthy spectacle of a trial with dueling film critics, clergymen, and university professors testifying. But Mr. Jacobellis was ultimately found guilty on both counts and fined $2,500 in total, which is $28,690.03 in today's money. Between the 2 counts, he got $500 for the first count and $2,000 for the second count. And if he failed to pay those fines, he would be sentenced to the workhouse, which I assume is some sort of work transit alternative to prison.
So if you have enough money, you can see as many boobs as you want.
Yeah, eventually you'll wind up in prison, though. It's less being the recipient of it. I guess you could get in trouble for possessing it as well, but if somebody else showed it to you, I don't think that the person viewing it would get in trouble. It's just the person distributing it.
What about a flip book where no one page is dirty, but you put them all together and it's dirty?
I think that's still printed pamphlet, maybe?
I know, but you can't point to one page and say that's a dirty image.
But it said any whole or in part.
Oh, okay.
Right?
No dirty flip books.
Yeah, no dirty flip books. So the Ohio Intermediate and Appellate Supreme Courts both upheld the conviction, and then he appealed it to SCOTUS. Because if your case goes all the way up to your state Supreme Court, and there's an issue of federal constitutional muster, in this case it would be a free speech, then you can then appeal that state court opinion up to the Supreme Court of the United States to deal with the U.S. constitutional issue. The question presented at SCOTUS was, quote, whether the state courts properly found that the motion picture involved a French film called Les Amants, or the lovers, was obscene and hence not entitled to the protection for free expression that is guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendments. First Amendment, free speech, free press, etc. 14th Amendment incorporates the Bill of Rights to the states.
Due process clause.
Due process clause, so that all of the free speech and everything that the federal government cannot impinge on also means the state government cannot impinge on. So, while movies are generally protected by free speech, obscene movies are not. The court acknowledged that they would need to discern the, quote, dim and uncertain line, end quote, between obscenity and constitutionally protected speech. In theory, this is a question of fact for the jury. SCOTUS briefly entertained that theory, that it was a question of fact for the jury, because, quote, it would lift from our shoulders a difficult, recurring, and unpleasant task, end quote. They quickly rejected that because it's SCOTUS's duty to ensure constitutional protections. They were essentially like, we could take the easy way out and just dump this back to the state courts, but it's our duty. It's our duty to deal with these hard questions. The rule for determining obscenity was written 7 years prior in a case named Roth v. United States. That rule was, quote, whether to the average person applying contemporary community standards, the dominant theme of the material taken as a whole appeals to the prurient interest, end quote.
God, prurient interest. Prurient interest.
Prurient interest. For those who don't know what that means, because that is kind of a $1,000 word, it essentially means sexual interest. It arouses people. SCOTUS recognizes that it's not a perfect test, but it's better than the alternatives, so they follow it. With clarifications. Roth also defined obscenity in material as, quote, utterly without redeeming social importance, end quote. They indicated that the mere portrayal of sex in art, literature, or science doesn't remove it from constitutional protection. And they also deny a balancing test that would weigh social importance against a prurient interest. I cannot pronounce that word.
It's got more R's than you think. It
has more R's than should be. So essentially, just because there's sex somewhere, for example, an obstetrics and gynecology textbook, right? There's going to be some sexual images there. There's going to be a picture of a vagina and a vulva and all that stuff. The mere existence of that picture of intimate parts does not make that textbook obscene, right? There has to be that prurient interest, that purpose of sexual arousal in order for it to be obscene. Balancing tests are a way that a court frequently deals with things, being like, we have these interests on one side and these interests on the other side, and we need to figure out which one outweighs the other. They deny that in this because social importance versus prurient interest is a hard one to balance, I guess. There wasn't
saying
really
that this is a bright line rule, because it certainly isn't.
It's not a bright line rule.
So how is it not a balancing test is my question.
We'll explore that a little bit as we go along. So, in their decision, SCOTUS notes that the Model Penal Code has a requirement that material, quote, goes substantially beyond customary limits of candor in description or representation of such matters. Again, we're not just talking about, describing sexual parts or anything like that. It has to be, beyond the pale, essentially. And that Model Penal Code was coming up kind of around the same time as this case was, and so that's why they're looking at that to help them define it. What they were struggling with in Roth was the contemporary community standards issue. And in this case, in Jacob Ellis, they felt that the contemporary community standards cannot mean that it's based on specific local communities, because that would give varying standards of the law, right? They didn't specifically call out the Equal Protection Clause, but the Constitution also has an Equal Protection Clause, which means that regardless of where you are in the United States, regardless of what community you're in, either physically or socioeconomic or racial or what have you, the laws should apply equally to everybody, And they didn't specifically say that this is an equal protections issue, but they're kind of saying it's an equal protections issue. Because if, just using Oregon as an example, something that is not considered obscene in Portland may be considered obscene in Lakeside, right? Like, just the different areas of the state have different local tolerances for naked bike rides. As one example of something that happens in Portland every year.
And I will say nothing sexual about that. It is.
No.
There is a lot of flopping.
But could you imagine that happening in Roseburg?
Yeah, I could, and I would laugh really hard because I would be watching the bike ride. I'd be watching
everybody's
everybody else.
reaction. Right.
Yeah.
So this is why having varying standards of the law depending on where you live is not okay. So they said that countervailing community standards has to be society at large. Otherwise, you could potentially deny access to something that's acceptable in one area, but unacceptable somewhere else. And you'd have to either ban it the place that it's acceptable or force it on the place that it's not. And having those varying levels of acceptance could either, by law or by deterrence, deter distributors from selling materials for fear of prosecution in some places, even though that material is acceptable in other places.
I'm thinking of something that's really like the most innocuous thing ever, breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of people have come forward and said, hey, maybe my human baby would not like to have a towel over their head while they're eating.
Yep.
And so people are breastfeeding. It's not a sexual activity. It's the,
it's the biological function of the breast.
It's the biological function of the breast. You're nurturing a child, but I'm thinking of all the people who've come forward like, oh, but boobs turn me on. I was like, you need to get over yourself.
That is a you problem, sir.
That is a you problem. There is a human child that needs sustenance, and this is what the biological function of a breast is.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to get over yourself. Yeah,
Right.
Is it maybe a little bit like startling if you see somebody just like
whip a boob out,
but then as you take 1 second, you go, oh,
there's a baby's head there.
They're feeding their kid.
Yeah.
Maybe I should leave them alone.
Yep. Avert your eyes.
Yeah.
So essentially the varying standard of applicability of the Constitution, right, because we're talking about free speech rights, is not okay. So SCOTUS tried to balance protecting children from obscenity.
Oh gosh, it's always gotta protect the children.
So balancing protecting the children from the obscenity and not limiting adults to essentially children's programming, and that was actually in the decision. And they noted that rather than banning obscenity, localities should probably focus on laws limiting children's access to obscenity. And that's where they landed in terms of a balancing test. Because the law being reviewed is a blanket ban and not a ban on dissemination to children, the court applied strict scrutiny. So when a case goes up to the Supreme Court and they have these questions of constitutional muster, there are varying levels of scrutiny that they can use. The lowest level of scrutiny is a rational basis test, and that means, is the law rationally related to a government purpose, right? And that's when we talk about time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. Those are rationally related to the government not wanting people making tons of noise at 3 a.m. and waking everybody up, right? That's a time, place, manner restriction on speech and assembly. It's not a topic-based speech restriction, whereas this question on obscenity is topic-based, and when it's topic-based, it has to be strict scrutiny, which is the highest level of scrutiny.
Okay. You've gone full lawyer on us.
I have.
You've gone full lawyer. So for the non-lawyers listening, free speech, what you say, and even how you say it, is generally very protected in the United States, particularly in what's known as a public forum. So like truly public property. However, long ago, the Supreme Court said, yes, the First Amendment is very important. And if the government in any form, state, local, federal, wants to limit how somebody says something and what they say, they have to have a really significant interest. And the law has to be really small to protect that significant interest. And how they look at it is called strict scrutiny. So it has to be really, like, the law has to be really, really specific. And it's been said that, like, states can limit when people say things, or in kind of like sometimes the manner in which they say things, but not speech entirely. So, for example, you can limit somebody coming in and shouting nonstop during a legislative session on the House floor, but you have to, so that's a place restriction. They can't go be shouting in there, but there has to be an opportunity for that person to say what they want to say pretty close by. So you can move them. You can also restrict times, so like noise curfews. And that's a narrowly tailored, so a small protection that the goal isn't to stop somebody's speech. The goal is to let maybe a neighborhood sleep through the night.
A more concrete example of, and this isn't necessarily speech, but, you know, the example that I use to explain to my clients is, I'm free to swing my arms around so long as I don't punch you in the face.
Yeah.
Right? My rights cannot impinge on somebody else's rights.
I mean, because that's a part of free expression. But We're talking here where the Supreme Court had already said, hey, you can't infringe on somebody's right to free expression or free speech, even if that's through movies. Except for, like, what if it's just really obscene? Mm-hmm. What if it's pornographic? Then they're carving that out as an exception to what is speech. And they did the same thing with, like, threats of violence.
Yep.
You can't just threaten to hurt anybody whenever you want and expect no consequences. That is also carved out of a protection. So there's certain types of speech that are not protected under free speech, or like this free expression.
Yeah, incitement to violence is the big term for threats, where it's one thing to be like shouting vulgarities at somebody. It's another thing to be like, let's all gang up and kill this person. And then a whole bunch of people join you with, you know, swords and stuff.
Sword.
My brain just went blank. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if you're planning, then like, for example, if Frankie and I were planning to commit a crime.
That's called conspiracy.
That's called conspiracy. That speech is not protected.
Right.
We can't just say whatever we want, whenever we want. That's allowed to be a crime.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Get to the good stuff. Get to the epic.
I'm getting there. So the court's applying strict scrutiny because it is the content of the speech that we're looking at. And the state's objections to the film, obviously, were almost entirely within the love scene at the end of the movie. Sorry, spoiler alert.
Oh my gosh, you've just destroyed a film from, what is it, 1954?
Something like that.
That I was planning on finding somewhere.
The film itself was highly rated, including amongst the best films of the year by 2 nationally acclaimed critics. And the court decided it was not obscene within the definitions laid out in the previous SCOTUS case law. That is the main opinion. There were a few concurring and dissenting opinions. One of the concurring opinions was from Justice Black, who wrote separately to say that essentially censorship violates the freedom of speech and of the press. Kind of clear in the main body of the opinion. Not sure why he had to write separately for that. Justice Stewart wrote separately to express the difficulty in defining the undefinable. He also opines that criminal laws censoring obscenity should be limited to hardcore porn. And then he says that he isn't going to attempt to further define what would be covered, except to say, quote, I know it when I see it.
I know it when I see it. I can't tell you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it.
And this motion picture was not that. Which is like, I mean, It's a great line for you to be remembered in the history of SCOTUS. It's not fucking helpful to say, I know it when I see it and this ain't it. Like, okay, so what is?
What is? I mean, because there could be even films that feature explicit types of sexuality that are downright educational.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
so that is this famous quote
That's
about
the famous quote.
obscenity that I know it when I see it, like he's seeing it very regularly.
Yeah, right.
So I guess when we're coming out to like why are we talking about this case is this is a very famous case bolstering free speech protection and freedom of expression protection that we later see in the Hustler magazine case. Because that we should do that sometime. Sometime we're going to do the Hustler magazine case, but as much legalese as we worked in there, specifically you, Frankie, you just were like, hey, lawyer, we're just gonna...
I'm used to teaching law students and baby attorneys.
I taught a law school class. Maybe I got good ratings because I taught to them.
Like normal people?
Like normal people. So saying, hey, even though this featured explicit sexuality, it's not obscenity.
Right.
And it had a genuine artistic purpose.
Yep, and that's kind of what Justice Greenberg wrote separately to say. The objectionable scene is so, quote, fleeting and fragmentary that a censor's alert would be sufficient. Essentially just what we would call today a content warning. Otherwise, Justice Greenberg said that an ill-matched marriage has been told time and time again in books, movies, and soap operas. And that the analysis would have been different if they were looking at the apparently more explicit advertising than the movie itself. The advertising used such quotes as, when all conventions explode in the most daring love story ever filmed, and as close to authentic amour as possible on the screen, and the frankest love scenes yet seen on film, and contains one of the most sensuous love scenes seen in this country. Like, those advertisements, closer to obscenity.
Yeah, than the actual film.
Than the 2-second shot of a boob in the movie, not enough.
There's this absolutely incredible German movie called M. And I do recommend this, but they're trailing a child rapist and murderer. But they can't say that explicitly because of the restrictions on the film code at the time.
Yep.
And someday we're going to dig into the Hays Code, which is one of my favorite topics. Nobody wants to talk to me about the Hays Code. I just want to talk about the Hays Code.
Well, now you have a podcast. You can talk to anybody who will listen.
About, like, the history of why violence and explicit violence is far more acceptable in American media than sexuality. We can expect that the average American adult is going to engage in sexual behaviors at some point during their lifetime. Most people will, and that's okay. And we don't want people chopping somebody's head off.
Right. We're like actually biologically wired on the most part to have sex. We're less biologically wired to kill each other.
Someone. Not so like asexual people are real and they are valid.
Yep. That's why I said on the most generally.
On the most part, and that's asexuality is a perfectly normal part of the sexuality spectrum. But most people engage in consensual sexual behavior over the course of their lifetime.
Yep.
And that's okay, but we really shouldn't, shoot somebody. So why is violence more okay and far more accepted than sexuality? Or healthy depictions of sexuality.
Right.
There was, what film was it? I think it was Boys Don't Cry, which is a very violent film.
Yes.
And is great. Kimberly Pierce directed that, starring Hilary Swank. It's intense. It's a movie that I only ever wanted to watch one time. But there was this, to get it from an X rating to an R rating, there was a scene where one character engages in oral sex with another character. And as they were coming up, one character was wiping his mouth off from the oral coitus, and the censors are like, nope, can't wipe your mouth off.
Too much.
But at the end, and this is factual. It features people getting murdered.
Right.
I'm like, yep, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move ahead to similar era.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna talk about McCarthyism.
Yep.
And separately talk about Joseph McCarthy. So when you think about McCarthyism, what comes to mind for you?
Red Scare.
The Red Scare, and what was happening in the government?
Well, is that Cold War times with the Russians, or am I thinking a little bit too late?
You're too early. So what a lot of people think of, what
Space
I thought
race.
of,
Space race
was the House Un-American Activities Committee.
That's because you're a nerd.
Yeah, except for that was not Joseph McCarthy. So McCarthyism came forward later as this broad, sweeping term for this Red Scare and activities by the government to persecute communists and people believed to be communists in the United States. And that action was through the House Un-American Activities Committee. But that committee was started in 1937, 10 years before Joseph McCarthy made it to the American Senate. And it was originally started as both investigating fascism and communism. And Joseph McCarthy, his era of prominence is really restricted from 1950 to 1954.
Yep.
Whereas the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, was in some form in existence, its predecessor, from about 1917 to about 1975. And these Senate hearings where they're dragging people in front of the Senate and saying, hey, are you a communist? Give us, communist names, actually criminally convicting people of contempt of court, was going long before Joseph McCarthy and long after. Yep. There was really 3 different iterations of the same thing. And he comes to prominence in 1950, and he drastically and dramatically leaves American favor in 1954. And then he dies 3 years later. I'm not going to say he's a good guy. He's an absolute trash gremlin. Joseph McCarthy was not a good person, pretty well start to finish. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about just the Red Scare. Yeah. So the first Red Scare in the United States happens about 1917 when the Russian Revolt comes about. There's some reactions to that, but we don't see the extreme levels of reaction. There's propaganda, like pro-capitalist propaganda in the United States, and there's also activities by communists and anarchists in the United States. There's a really very interesting case about 2 anarchists, Sacco and Vanzetti, yes, that I'm going to take apart and set aside for a different time, because Sacco and Vanzetti is a very, very interesting case. So we have this existing kind of vague and nebulous kind of anti-communist sentiment. We have World War II, where the United States is pretty well aligned with Russia. And then pretty quickly after that, tensions are rising. Let's talk about the House HUAC. I'm just going to abbreviate it to that. So this really came into fruition, into itself, more what we know, in 1937 because of fascism. And so it changes from a previous iteration to this committee that's investigating fascism and communism, kind of America's enemies. Because of what we just talked about, and weirdly your case linked in very well, it is and has always been, hypothetically, legal to be a communist or a fascist in the United States of America.
Yeah, free speech.
However, not functionally, has not been functionally legal.
No, because, well, we see what the fascists are doing today. And then back then there was essentially theory that if you are a communist, then you are automatically a Russian spy.
Automatically a Russian spy. Poor Owen Latimer. You don't see this committee come into prominence until immediately after World War II. And it kind of loses its anti-fascist element and just goes full anti-communist. A few things are happening at the time. We're seeing China turning communist in 1949, and Ethel and Julius Rosenberg.
Yeah.
Coming to light in 1949.
They got sandbagged.
They super did. But in 1947, there's this famous at the time, I don't know if it's like school kid famous today, case of the Hollywood 10. 10 prominent Hollywood directors and screenwriters brought before the House Un-American Activities Committee who refuse to testify. They're called in front of this committee. There's 10 of them. They refuse to testify, period, not under their Fifth Amendment protections, but under their First Amendment protections. Now on court or in shows, you'll see people saying, oh, I'm taking the Fifth. I plead the Fifth.
If anybody watched Senate hearings this morning, Dr. Anthony Fauci took the Fifth for every single question, which, you know, under advice of counsel, sometimes that's a thing you got to do.
Yeah.
But
and bless his heart. So what that means is I have a right to not say in court or in a hearing things that might incriminate me or might get me in trouble.
Even if there's nothing to hide, you're just concerned that the other people in the room are going to twist what you said.
Correct. But these 10 people did not plead the Fifth or take the Fifth. They took the First, saying you can't drag me in here to ask if I'm a communist or to try and get me in trouble for being a communist, because being a communist is perfectly legal in the United States. And those 10 people were all given congressional contempt of court and sent to jail for between 6 months and a year, and then put on the now famous Hollywood blacklist. I'm going to take a pause here. So that's 1949. 6 of the 10 people sent to jail for this are what kind of people? Frankie Hupy.
Jews.
They are Jews. How did you, as a Jewish person, know that 6 of the 10 people are Jewish?
I've written a paper on the Rosenbergs. But...
Okay. So that's already in, like, American consciousness. We have this big push down into Hollywood and this investigation. And then
and just, like, side note, historical issues with Jews, right? There used to be people who were fleeing from pogroms and from the Holocaust that were Jewish that got turned away because the quotas got full. And also there's just the underlying anti-Semitism that's kind of baked into our country. The conspiracy theories that, like, the Jews control all the money and everything, which goes way back to ancient times when Catholics weren't allowed to charge interest, so the Jews started banking and stuff like that. It is baked in to this country's psyche that there's something wrong with the Jewish population.
Okay, so we're going to take a pause and go on a side quest, because we both have ADHD. So a lot of my mom's family immigrated, and their last name was originally Clounch, which is an Ashkenazi name.
Yes.
No, it was originally Glentz. Sorry, it was originally Glentz.
That makes more sense. Yep.
Yeah, it was Glentz. So all their last names were Glentz. My, like, great-great-grandfather's name was Hieronymus Glentz. And Hieronymus is, in my opinion, the perfect first name. Yeah. And then they changed their last name to Clounch. All about the same time, and it was in the early 30s.
Yep.
And that was during a rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. Okay, so 6 of the 10 people are Jews.
What?
And we see this thread of anti-Semitism from the start to the finish. It's not just because Jewish people are historically and today overrepresented in leftist working movements.
It's almost like we come from a repressed community and want freedom.
That's wild. How could you say that? But to say like 60% of these people who sent to jail are Jewish is wild.
It's ridiculously disproportionate. I think the United States population is maybe like 8-ish% Jewish, something like that. Some relatively small number. So to have 60% of a group going to jail be Jewish is wildly disproportionate.
Fascinating. Like, there was a studio head response to this, a famous letter sent to Congress and published opposing this type of action, and 15 major Hollywood players and studio heads signed on to that. And 10 of the 15 people who opposed what the HUAC was doing.
Oh, I was way off. 2.4% of the United States population is Jewish.
Okay, so 10 of the 15 people who are responding and opposing this publicly, even risking their careers and their well-being, major Hollywood players, Jewish.
Yes.
Okay. So you have that. Then you have what is still described in our textbooks as the fall of China, but when China became a communist state, and immediately after that, you have Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, who are accused of spying and passing atomic secrets from the U.S. atomic program to the Soviets.
Yep.
Who are executed, who are the only two people in the United States executed because of Soviet espionage.
Essentially treason, yeah.
Essentially treason. The evidence is very flimsy.
It is so flimsy.
It's just the brother-in-law.
Something like that.
We'll talk about that. We should talk about the Rosenberg someday, too. That's another...
whole thing.
But the United States is feeling a lot of tension. And this is also when you start to see the origins of the American Christian, like, theological ideas about Christians in power and a Christian government. These, in God we trust, on the money and the Pledge of Allegiance, under God. Because they're trying to differentiate themselves. So originally it was like this differentiation from the godless
communists.
Communists. All right. Then in 1950, he'd been in office since 1947. Along comes Joseph McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy is an all-around turd burglar. He was born in relatively average white American dude circumstances, went to law school, was not liked by his legal community, but was elected judge. Had a failed stab at the Senate, went to war, comes back, gets elected judge again, and then defeats in Wisconsin a very progressive and seemed like all-around good dude, maybe probably racist, we'll just say probably racist, and goes to the Senate. He had already lied about his military record. He should have been convicted of war profiteering.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, he lied in his first circuit court judge election. He was just everywhere. He's just dealing him out. And the community that knows him also, it's just like they don't like him. Yeah. So the legal community, before he's elected anything, like, this guy is a asshole. So he gets elected to the Senate, but in 1950, everything's coming to a peak, and then Senator Joseph McCarthy makes a big speech in Wisconsin saying that he knows about over 200 communists in the federal government. And being an opportunistic shyster, I bet is also kind of surprised when that catches on.
Yeah.
And becomes very popular. He later says, oh no, it's only 57 people.
Yep.
So we have the...
Just kidding!
We have the HUAC already going on, already dragging people in front of it, destroying careers with very little evidence. There was investigations later that showed that a lot of people had absolutely no affiliation.
Yeah, it was all, like, made up.
Mostly made up. And it coincides with the Lavender Scare. So it's like where communist kind of also became a code word for queer.
Yep.
A lot of queer people drug in. But he's announced, and then he expands the scope of this paranoia and this investigation, kind of gets his own subcommittee. And the people on the committee don't like him. But he has this smaller and less publicized reign of terror where this absolute narcissistic dillweed finally has the power and the prestige and the esteem that he wants. He's got all this national attention and is seen as an American hero, kind of protecting people. He's taken it to the next level. And there are too many lies for me to really reference during this time period, but we can say from this speech in 1950 to 1954, the reign of Joseph McCarthy and his entrance into the popular American imagination. And he falls very, very rapidly out of favor with the American people in 1954 when he's conducting hearings specifically into the U.S. Armed Forces or the Army. And
don't fuck with the Army.
He takes it too far. They're also televised, so people get to see, even though processed through press release, rather than just what's written about him, they get to see him and his bullying
and
behavior.
This was one of the first televised Senate committee, like the televising of these things had just started. And so it was people's first look into the guts of government, and it was not a good look.
Not a good look. The chief counsel of the United States Army was a lawyer named Joseph Welch. And during these hearings, he says to McCarthy, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" And as Americans are seeing what McCarthy is really like, that latches into the American thought about him. And shortly thereafter, in March of 1954, famed broadcast journalist and investigative journalist Edward R. Murrow broadcast a piece examining McCarthy's method. So as quickly as he rose, he fell. So he made this speech in Wisconsin. I actually don't have in my notes about when in 1950, but in early in 1954, so we have about a 3-year period. Boom, he falls down. And then in December of 1954, the Senate votes 67-22 to censure McCarthy for his conduct, quote, contrary to Senate traditions. He lost his committee influence. He was shunned by his colleagues and by the press. And less than 3 years later, he dies of complications related to alcoholism. Now, the HUAC continues in some form, not as big, but it continues through the 60s and 70s. During the Vietnam War era, there's a couple of famous activists who were brought in that would dress up as Santa Claus or as people from the Revolutionary War, and it really turned the popular American imagination against what the HUAC was doing, period. They changed their name and then were officially abolished in 1975. But this big scare and this overreaching attempt to criminalize what should have been perfectly legal the entire time lasts really in the American imagination from about 1946 to about 1954. And over 3,000 people were brought in front of the HUAC.
Which is ridiculous because it was all just him grabbing at something to have his 15 minutes. There was little to no there behind his allegations, which is even clear from being like, I know 200 people, and then being like, just kidding, it's 57.
Just kidding, it's 57. I saw a really great short. So where I got my information is PBS documentary McCarthy. A few articles, the Middle Tennessee Freedom of Speech Association, but also there's a really moving short on PBS that was separate from the documentary about an academic named Owen Lattimore, who was a scholar about China and Central Asia, focusing on Mongolia. He never earned a college degree, but was a professor, wrote some really influential papers, and in 1950, McCarthy accused him of being a top Soviet spy because of his associations with Central Asia. And he went through years of Senate hearings and brutality and getting drugged through the press, and he was exonerated eventually. If you have a moment, go to PBS and look him up. It's about 5.5 minutes, but a really moving short piece on his experience being railroaded and then eventually moving to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, we can link that in the show notes.
That was very interesting, especially since this person who is a self-made intellect advanced a lot of our philosophical discussions around the way human societies evolve, grow, decline, and interact with other societies. Completely innocent after a very, very, very rigorous and thorough investigation of espionage.
And this whole thing, like all of these accusations, all of these Senate hearings, this was like the definition of a witch hunt.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We hear that term thrown around quite a bit in a less witch hunty situation today, because, you know, evidence actually exists. But back then it was literally like, I heard my sister said that her husband said that this person's a communist. And that was enough to bring somebody into question.
And people would get out of trouble by naming other names. So it was this perpetuating cycle that became an obsession. And all of these people are really publicized. There's a really great Agatha Christie book called Ordeal by Innocence. And just that idea of the ordeal by innocence is...
and you're having to prove yourself innocent as opposed to having the state prove you guilty, which is how it's supposed to go if it were actually criminal charges, which there wouldn't be because it was not illegal to say you're a communist.
Or be a communist or to be a communist for communism. However, the people that were sent to jail, it was contempt of court, and the rest of these people, their careers or their lives were ruined, devastated.
Yeah.
In this period by a guy who was notoriously guilty of what he accused other people of doing. I read this report of this at the time because he was also dragging in queer people, especially queer men, that he was a regular at a gay bar in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And I was like, we don't want him. We don't want you. Okay, so next week, I would like to talk about the effort to legalize the arcade game of pinball.
That means I need a serious one, and I was focused on this. So I may surprise you next week because I have been swamped and have not had a chance to think about what I'm going to do for next week.
Yeah, let's make stuff up as we go.
We can make stuff up as we go. Maybe we'll have 2 fluffy ones next week, and I'll do the hearsay one because that's already on my mind.
The pinball story, have you heard of this?
I have not.
Pinball being illegal? Very interesting.
Speakeasy type stuff, or?
No, that's... I don't want to spoil it for you.
Okay.
But the effort, #legalize pinball.
All right. Well, if we're doing that kind of thing, maybe I'll look into something along those lines as well in terms of various entertainment not being legal. Perhaps by constitutional amendment. We'll see.
And that was your fresh nightmare, America.
Yep.
Drink lots of water.
Drink lots of water. So, some news on our publication front, I guess. We now have socials. So we have Facebook, because I'm old. So Dumb Defenses Podcast.
Aren't we the same age?
I'm like 3 years older than you.
Wait, how old are you?
41.
Yeah, you are 3 years older than me. 38.
So Facebook, because I'm old, Dumb Defenses Podcast on there. Instagram at Dumb Defenses Podcast. And Blue Sky at Dumb Defenses Pod, because I was only allowed 18 characters. All of our teaser videos will be up on those pages. I apologize to those on Instagram and Blue Sky for the unlabeled dump of prior snips. I was trying to get it done and it didn't make me label them. So sorry about that.
I'm going to start a Tumblr and it's going to be no snips, mostly chaos. Because, we both have, the same neurospicy shit. but you're a lot more organized in your presentation.
I'm more autistic, you're more ADHD.
So I'm not going to let Frank touch the Tumblr, and it's going to be an onslaught of chaos.
Have fun with that.
Thank you.
As always, like, review, share the podcast so we can continue to grow. Email us at dumbdefensespodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, or a case that you want us to look at, or a historical legal adjacent topic. Also, we have decided that once we hit 1,000 streams, we will put together a Patreon behind which you'll be able to watch us make faces at each other as we tell these stories.
You know what? Because we're looking at 100.
We were at 125 last I checked.
Okay. So like 1,000 streams for one episode. That's a big ask.
I was thinking 1,000 total streams.
No. One episode. 1,000 streams.
Oh man, guys, share the podcast.
Share the podcast.
You want the videos.
You don't want the videos.
You do.
I recently, and you'll see this last week, I shaved off my beard, and for a whole week I looked like a human thumb. Frank's asking for organized thing. I want you to, in your peak chaos moment, if you are panic buying self-care items at 2 o'clock in the morning, I want you to email me personally at the podcast with whatever you're thinking about. And Frank will send it to me, and I will enjoy it, and I might read it, but I can anonymize you if you want. So, like, Frank's asking for organized stuff. I want you to go raccoon mode and talk to me, because I live in raccoon mode. Thank you.
One of our younger attorneys was trying to, like, say hi and be nice to us earlier today, and I was just completely focused on something else. And I later messaged him and said, sorry if it seemed like I was out of it. I have about 10 gerbils running around in my head, and they're tripping over each other.
I want, whenever your brain is eating old pizza out of a dumpster, I want you to talk to me. And hi, Mom. Love you. Say hi to my mom, Frank.
Hi, Judah's mom.
Okay.
All right. So, fun stuff coming up next week. Please share if you want to get videos of the podcast eventually. I promise they are entertaining. We will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.